And welcome back, Fourth and Long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another off-season footy supporter series. And ladies and gentlemen, I told you I'm going to try to do some stateside fans this year. So this one's going to be just a tiny bit different than some of my AFL podcasts. So keep an eye on it. We are going to have a lot of fun. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to me from Perth, Western Australia, it is Nathan. Nathan, thank you for joining me on today's podcast.
Thanks, Dom. Good to see you, mate.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's jump right into it. I know this is a footy podcast, but I kind of like to know just the tiniest bit about the people that I'm chatting with outside of the game of footy. So, just real quick bio on who you are and a little bit about yourself outside of the game of football.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm 50 years old. I've got a wife and a daughter who's 9. And I work night shift at a hospital, one of the major hospitals here in Perth. And I've been doing that for 22 years full time. And yeah, that's I live in the south part of Perth, one of the southern suburbs. And yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's get into why we're here.
Yeah,
We're
sure.
here to talk footy. So, being in Western Australia, another footy mad state, I got to ask this question. What is your
Yeah.
favorite thing about the sport of footy?
Oh, just that it's someone described it as reality TV, the best reality TV. And I think that's what I like about it. It's just so real and so much can happen in a short time, and the constant action and flow of it. And I find actually the players' stories quite interesting as well. Like when you get to know some of the players and their backstories, where they've come from, what they've had to go through to get to the AFL or even the local leagues, the state leagues. It's actually quite interesting to me. And all of those things combined together on a particular day can make for a huge amount of action and excitement.
Absolutely agree. It is a very interesting sport because there's never a shortage of fun and action at any time
Yeah.
in a game of footy. So I'm gonna bring up. I want you to go back into your time frame a little bit. Can you remember
Yeah.
your earliest footballing memory?
Yeah, well, I actually started watching it a little bit on TV with my dad when I was about 8 years old. And but it wasn't until I got to the age of 10, year five at primary school, what we call primary school over here. And my teacher was a former East Perth State player. And he implemented a footy tipping competition for all the kids in the class. And that really ramped up my interest because I wanted to win that footy tipping competition. And so I started watching the local competition at the time. This was 1982, and what we call the WAFL or the Waffle. And yeah, so I started watching games a lot and tipping teams to win. And I think it made my interest a great deal more because after 5 or 6 weeks, I was actually in the lead. So, so it continued to grow over the course of that year, and yeah, yeah, that was my first introduction to it, and then from there, it was about picking a team.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So we get to this point again. Normally, this is where I ask the AFL club, but you're in Western Australia. So I'm going to ask you is we're talking state sides. What is your waffle side and why do you support them?
Wow, that's a long answer. um, yeah, so I, I reckon in the first 5 or 6 weeks of that 1982 season, I flipped between three or four different teams as a 10-year-old. You know, you're trying to figure out which team you like. And then about halfway through 1982, my cousins, two girls, and their mum, my auntie, invited me to a game between West Perth and East Perth, which in those days was called the Perth Derby or Derby, and it was, you'd get a good 20 to 25,000 people at those games. Like they were massive, massive, massive. And I've actually got old footage of that match, and you couldn't move. Like there was just people everywhere, and the grounds are quite small here in the WAFL leagues. So you can imagine fitting in 20 to 25,000 people in a ground in 1982. But anyway, West Perth were playing East Perth, and West Perth, the colours and the way they played, the colours of West Perth are red and blue. And just the way they played with a lot of style, with a lot of elegance, and it really caught my eye. My cousins were West Perth supporters as well, which probably helped. And it was a really exciting finish, and West Perth won the game. And I think from that moment on, I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked.
Hey, that's a great story. I mean, you never
Yeah.
know what way it is that you fall in love with your team. So you said you had some cousins. Were anybody else in your family West Perth supporters, or were they different waffle side supporters?
No, see, my family had all come from Sydney, in
Okay.
Australia, and moved over to Perth. So they were all rugby league. Rugby league is the big sport in Sydney in Australia.
Hmm.
So they were all rugby league people, and so I never really, until this tipping comp at my school, never really had that much interest in football, Australian rules. But yeah, once I saw a game live with that many people and the atmosphere and the excitement and everything, as I said, I was completely hooked. But there was no relevance much to my family at all. As I said, my dad watched a little bit of waffle when I was a bit younger than that, and I started watching a little bit of it on TV. But it was the interest at school that got me going.
Interesting. And again, everybody has different stories on that.
Yeah,
And being a Sydney supporter, I'm constantly in contact with many Sydney people, and the NRL is king in Sydney. So 100%
it
agree with
certainly
you
is.
on that. So because I don't know the state sides as well, and again, it's
Yeah.
something that I'm working on getting into. So could you give me just a little history lesson on West Perth?
Yeah, West Perth started in 1885, I think it was, and they were one of the first clubs that begun in the WAFL competition. And they've always been known as kind of like, there was in the 50s and the 60s, there was an influx of European immigrants into Australia, and they tended to uh, find that a lot of the Italians and Greeks and all of that tended to drift towards following West Perth Football Club. And so they were known as the Garlic Munchers. And um, so there was this thing that grew with the club. The club's always been really, really successful. I think it's won something like 20 or 30 premierships in that period from 1885. They've always been reasonably competitive, had great players, and they played all of their home games out of a place called Leederville Oval, which is in the north of Perth, from 1885 right up until 1993, at the end of 1993. And then they discovered, I think there was a push on from the local council in Leederville to turn the ground into a big car park. So they were kind of forced to move to Joondalup, which is really way north of Perth, some 30, 40 kilometres. That was 1994. They're still there in Joondalup to this day. But quite interestingly, the council actually overturned that thing after they'd actually left and established themselves in Joondalup about 3 or 4 years later. And the ground now still exists. And it's the home ground of some of our arch rivals. Our main arch rival is East Perth, who now have that as their home ground, which to this day is actually really annoying for a lot of West Perth people. And also another team, Subiaco, have that as their home ground as well. But ironically, we've just played in a grand final on Leederville Oval in 2022. And we managed to win that grand final on Leederville Oval, which for the old time West Perth supporters like myself, which was quite nostalgic and wonderful, and there was tears and all sorts of things after the game.
That is fantastic. It's a little bit of you just kind of chuckle at that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And I love seeing the history of the clubs here. That's absolutely fantastic. So we'll stay back in time a little bit with you
yeah,
personally.
please.
Can you remember the first West Perth item that you ever were given or bought?
Yeah, I think in 1983, I remember absolutely. It was just me and my dad growing up. He raised me by himself, and I was always begging him to take me to games because I didn't know you know what else to do, and I loved the football. I was listening to it on the radio every week, and I think eventually I got one of his mates to take me to the game, and I was like 11 or something, and he bought me a scarf, a West Perth scarf, and I remember that very clearly, and that was really nice of that guy to do that, to drive me, because it's a fair way from where we lived. It was a good 20 kilometres there and another 20 kilometres back. For him to do that off, just out of the goodness of his heart, was a pretty amazing thing. And yeah, he bought me a scarf, and I remember every time I was listening to the radio on a Saturday in my room, listening to the game, because back then I think we only had like televised games like on a Saturday night for like an hour. We'd have highlights. Yeah, it was all about listening to the games on the radio and getting round the ground scores. And I always have that scarf on when I was listening to the game on the radio, up
Fantastic.
until I started going myself.
That's awesome. Fantastic. I love those stories. It's the little things sometimes that you'd
Yeah,
be surprised that you really stick out in your mind. So,
yeah,
this next question for me, I always love this because it's very interesting. Fandom is very different for everybody, and I
yeah.
think sometimes it's die hard. I know is thrown out, bandied about, and some people think it has a negative connotation. So I like hearing people kind of describe their fandom, shall we say. So
Yeah.
if you could just quickly, can you describe your fandom for West Perth? I mean, is this one of those that every single week you're looking at the news stories, you're trying to find out everything that you can. The off season goes, you're trying to see how the team can improve. Are you that, or can you kind of shut it off for a bit? How's kind of your fandom of West Perth?
Well, yeah, it's pretty full on. Like, I'm always trying to find out more information about West Perth. I'm on their website a fair bit. And as much as I try to get to games as much as I can. But there's that lag period over summer, where you get that 3 months off where there's nothing happening, of course. And that tends to build my hunger and excitement again for it. So by the time that 3 or 4 months is over, I'm desperate to get into the season. Can't wait, like this time of year, because the season starts in March and we're starting to get going again with all the information. I'm the same with all my football teams. I can't wait for March, April, when it all kicks off. So yeah, I'm always very, very interested in what's happening with West Perth, and really on board with everything that's going on with them all the time. Even in summer, I've got my own YouTube channel, which I put videos on of West Perth and Sydney Swans and other teams. But I also have uh, like my own history files, which I do lots of documentation describing, what happened in this game and how I felt about this win. And so I keep a lot of files and stuff, which are really, really immaculately organized, so that if something ever happens to me, someone will be able to read them and keep them. And so my fandom is pretty full on in that way. I like to document what it all means to me, so that so that it's really obvious to other people, if you know what I mean.
And there's no perfect way to fan. Everybody fans differently, so it's just very interesting to see how everybody does it differently. And it's fantastic
Yeah,
because you learn little things about how kind of people do it, and it's really fascinating because everybody does it differently. Nobody is exactly the same. There's some people that they live and die. I mean, if their team loses, they slam themselves in their own room. They don't want to talk to
yeah.
him. They bugger everybody. Get the heck away from me. And then there's fans that literally 10 seconds after the game is over, they're perfectly fine. There's no emotional reaction. Everybody, and
Yeah.
there's everything in between, which again,
Yeah. Yeah.
fandom it's a fickle and very interesting thing, but I love it because it gives a different kind of look at the way people look at it. So we'll stay in the past just the tiniest bit. Can you remember the first game that you ever attended of West Perth live?
Yeah, it was that one in '82 with the cousins.
Mhm.
But then it evolved from there. As I said, I think in '83 I had that my dad's friend that drove me to a game, and then yeah, it really developed from there in terms of 1984. I remember all this stuff so clearly, like it was yesterday. And yeah, that '84 and '85 was when it really began to kick off.
Fantastic. That's absolutely okay. And this will be interesting for me because I don't always know that, like I said, I don't know the state signs as well. So I'd be very
Yeah.
interested. Do you have a favorite player of the past for West Perth? And do you have a favorite player currently on their list?
Well, there was a guy by the name of Peter Managlio that used to play for West Perth, and he was always my favourite player. And I later became a trainer with West Perth, or what we would call a water boy, or
Hmm.
type of thing. And I got to kind of be out there on the ground with him every week, not in a playing capacity, of course, but and got to know him a little bit. And it's one of those ones where you they say never meet your heroes, but when I met this guy and spent time with him, I found that he was actually 10 times nicer and better than I expected. Such a lovely fella. And yeah, so Peter Managlio as a kid was probably one of my favourites. Also, another guy called Paul Mifka, who'll be very familiar to West Perth supporters. I ended up getting his number as number plates on my car, which I still have on my car to this day.
Love
He's
it.
number 30. He's number 37 on number plates as my car. And actually, it's quite a funny story. He's a policeman, and um, as I said, I was a trainer with West Perth I was from '89 to '93. And about 1999, I'm driving along the road, come to a set of lights, and this police car pulls up next to me. And the window comes down. And I think, oh my goodness, what have I done? I'm in trouble. Did
Hmm.
I do something wrong? And there's his head, and he kind of remembered me because obviously he was playing when I was a trainer. And I said, Paul, how you going? And he said, is that my number on your number plates?
Ah,
And I said, yeah, it is. And he said, oh, you thieving bastard.
love it.
So we
That
had we
is
had a really
amazing.
really good laugh about that whole thing. It was quite funny. It's one of my treasured kind of memories. These days, yeah, there's a couple of guys that there's one guy who's been around for a long time for West Perth, who's played for the last 10 or so years, by the name of Aaron Black, who I just love watching him play. He's just a little guy, but he's in and under all the time and getting the ball from the packs, and just a really dogged and hungry, and continues to be a great player every week for our team. Even when we have bad games and we lose by 10 goals, he's always been best players. He's just terrific.
Awesome. He's great. Like I said, I'm loving hearing these names. I'm definitely gonna have to look up some of these players for sure. Absolutely. So I love this one because for me, everybody's got a different one. Everybody has a
Yeah.
different reason for this. Most memorable moment as a West Perth
Oh, wow.
supporter.
Gee, there's so many. There's so many. Look, I think there was the one that stands out more than anything. And it's funny because I put this video on YouTube a while back, and I wrote this huge long description. Um, and as I was writing it, I was actually bawling my eyes out. So I was crying. It was so real, and like it was yesterday. Anyway, it was like around 13 in 1985, and we were playing a team that had not been beaten yet. In fact, not only had they not been beaten, no one was getting within a hair's breadth of them. Like we were slightly a contender, We were trying to get into the top four at the time, but we were kind of on the edges of it. But they were top of the ladder. They hadn't lost a game. They'd won 12 in a row. And, I remember even thinking before the game started, I was like, now it's 2 buses and a train, and it's about a 2-hour trip there and then another 2-hour trip back. Can I really be bothered? This is the top team. No one's gotten within 5 or 6 goals of them. I thought, I'm not even sure if I want to go. But then I thought, no, if we do win or something, if it gets close, it'll be exciting. So I'll go. Anyway, I got to the game, picked my favourite spot at this particular ground, Subiaco Oval, which was at a neutral venue, which I'm still not 100% sure today, while, most games in the WAFL were always at one team's home ground or the other. But this one was at neutral in Subiaco Oval, which was the big ground for all the AFL matches and stuff later on. So I picked my favourite spot there, and I think we got to about halfway through the third quarter, and we were probably about 20 plus points behind. And, all the West Perth supporters around me were just thinking, it's good effort. They've tried really hard. It's probably just going to peter out and we'll lose by 5 or 6 goals or more. And the other team, in fairness, were playing better. And then all of a sudden we got a goal, and then we got another one, and then we got another one. And as we were going into the last quarter, we was, less than a goal behind. And even none of us kind of dared to dream that we would actually win this game. Like, it was just phenomenal. And as the quarter went on and on, we got better and better. And I think the players grew a leg as well, because they just started to think, oh, hang on, we could beat the team that hasn't been unbeaten here. And there was this moment in the last quarter where everyone around me was so excited. They were pretty much all West Perth supporters. And we were like 3 points behind. There was probably about a minute or two left, not much. And we were all watching the play, and there was about 25, 30 players around the ball, about 60 metres out from our goal. And one of the West Perth players just managed to grab the ball and kick the ball forward, and everyone kind of gasped. And then we looked, and there was 2 of our guys sitting in the goal square by themselves. And we were like, and it was like everybody was so shocked, because this was just such a great defensive side. We were like, how does 2 of our guys get in the goal square by themselves? Mm-hmm. So they kind of looked at each other as the ball's coming down, as like, who's going to mark it and kick it? And then one left it for the other, and the other kicked the goal. And the roar when this goal went through and we got in front. And then the other team had a kick after the siren to win the game and missed. So we won the game. And as I mentioned in the thing on YouTube when I wrote the passage, the scenes after the game were like we won a premiership. We hadn't actually won a premiership for 10 years at that stage, and it was pretty much like winning a premiership. But that's the one that stands out the most.
That is fantastic. Those are the ones, those one games that just you can just close your eyes and you can see every bit of it. Those are the ones, whether it's a premiership, whether it's a regular season, whether it's a finals game, those are the ones I love, because you just close your eyes and you can see everything about it. Absolutely fantastic. So I think you kind of already brought this up a little bit, but we're going to go through West Perth's season a little bit. Kind of thoughts on last season, because I think you said, did they win a premiership last year?
Yeah, they won the premiership. They'd actually been up there a fair bit for the last 10 years. And they won before in 2013. And then, they kind of hung around 3rd, 4th, 5th spot for the last 8 or 9 years. I think they made a couple of grand finals in that, but just got absolutely pantsed and completely flogged. So, yeah, last year they were kind of thereabouts. And then there was talk about halfway through the year that they would play the grand final at Leederville Oval, which, as I said, was our old home ground. And once again, I think the players kind of, there's a lot of history attached to Leederville Oval. I'll tell you a funny story, actually, that obviously when I mentioned before that when we left Leederville Oval in 1993, at the end of 1993, there was a fair bit of angst that we had to leave. A lot of old-time West Perth people were pretty upset about the whole thing, and some of that still carries over to today. But I remember catching a bus, I think it was about 2001, and I got on the bus, and there, sitting there in one of the seats, is like one of the all-time. I won't mention his name, but one of the all-time legendary West Perth players. Like, and I just couldn't resist. Like, I just sat right next to him, and I just said, "Mate, tell me some stories. Like, just tell me some stories." And eventually, when it got uh, back to bottom line, it ended up being all about how upset he was that we didn't play at Leederville Oval anymore because he'd grown up playing there. And yeah, so going back to Leederville Oval to play a grand final there was huge for the club, and really, really massive. And as I said, for the old timers, it really pulled on a lot of heartstrings. And so to win the flag there, it was a massive day in September 2022. So yeah, I've actually got the shirt on here, which is the Premier's 2022 West Perth Falcons.
Fantastic. That is awesome. I was like, I think that's what I thought it was. And I think you had also said it in your story that because they had won it at Leadable Oval. That is fantastic.
Yeah,
And it's hard to get any better than that. So because I don't know the state sides as much, kind of
yeah,
how is your off season a little bit? Is there, I mean, I know we know the AFL, they have their drafts, so there's definitely WA boys that get thrown into the draft. So
yeah.
kind of what is the off season like for the Waffle? I mean, is there actually a draft, or is it a little bit like almost like soccer where you've got like academies and you've got youth kids that just come up and join West Perth? Educate me just a little bit on kind of what the off season is like. Is there trades? Kind of how does the Waffle do their off season?
Yeah, it's all a lot more low key, as you can imagine. It's that, excuse me, there's no draft or anything. But what happens is you get a lot of players delisted by the AFL,
Mhm.
and the Waffle is very quick to try and jump on those guys. Like, every team is looking at which players are delisted by the AFL and are trying to get them on their list. There's a fair bit of movement in the Waffle between teams. Like, a lot of players will kind of go, I'll move from Subiaco to South Fremantle, or one of the other teams, or and there's a fair bit of movement. But it's all, none of it's kind of as publicised, and there's no draft, and there's no kind of not that much in the news. A lot of the time, you'll get to a new season and you'll see a guy playing for a team, and you'll go, "Oh, okay, I didn't even know he moved teams."
Mhm.
But those guys that are delisted by the AFL are pretty much gold for the Waffle administrators at their clubs. Like, they're the ones they're chasing straight away as soon as they know that a guy hasn't got an AFL contract and he's not wanted. But also, the in South Australia, there's the SANFL, which is the South Australian State League, and there's the VFL, which is the Victorian State League, the Tasmanian one, State League, and obviously the West Australian one. And they're all chasing these guys. So there's a fair bit of competition to try and get some of these players to the Waffle teams or to the state teams. Obviously, if they've oh, excuse me, let me just have some water. Oh, that's better. Yeah, if there's some guy that's been drafted from the Waffle initially and he's come from WA, then they've obviously got a leg up in trying to get him back to WA to play for one of the teams here.
Yeah. So, all right. So it's basically it's kind of the tier down. So makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. So, all right,
Yeah,
we'll go to it. I tell people coming off a premiership, it's hard to get better because you can't really
yeah,
do much better
it is.
than a premiership. So, and
Yeah,
and I'm one of those that I hate the word expectation because it puts this like you expect something. I'm kind of a hope guy. So, kind of what are your thoughts for next season for West Perth? Do you think they can go back to back, or will it be tough? Will it be tough knowing there's going to be a target on West Perth's back?
yeah. I think that back to back is the hardest thing in football. I think winning a back to back premiership, it's proven over the years to be very, very tough in AFL, in state leagues, in every type of comp. So I think we've got a good list of players. We've got a good list there that can do the job. But I'm a big believer as well that if you haven't won a premiership for a while and then you win one, it's actually even harder because they've and there would have been a fair bit of celebration involved in winning that premiership and getting that, because there was a lot of guys that have been around the club for a long time. The coach had actually of West Perth had actually helped win a premiership with us in 1995, which was our first. He was the captain when we won the premiership in 1995, which was a 20-year drought at the time. He had later on gone and coached West Perth. Something happened there and it didn't work. And then he went to coach Claremont Football Club. And then he had come back to coach West Perth. And ironically, in the grand final in 2022, West Perth were playing his old team, Claremont, that he'd coached. So there would have been a fair bit of celebration from the coaching panel, from the players. And I always think it's the thing that's difficult to measure for players when they're coming off a premiership is their hunger level. They think they've got the hunger to win another premiership, but it's never as great as when you haven't won one for a while. And I think a lot of people delude themselves into thinking, oh yeah, we're still at the same level of hunger we were last year. But to actually have that level is something else and something difficult. So I think it's going to be tough, but fingers crossed.
Awesome. Hey, it's hard to get, but it's hard to get better than that. But if you got a good team, you never know how it's going to
Yeah.
go. So I love this. This next question is going to be really, really fun because I've done this with the AFL side. So I'm fascinated to see how this goes here. I'm going to install you as the list manager for West Perth. I'm going to let you have a little bit of fun here. If you could bring in any player from the Waffle, from any of the other sides to kind of help round out West Perth, who would be that player and why?
Probably there's a guy at Claremont by the name of Jai Bolton who's won the Sandover medal, which is the best and fairest player in the Waffle every year wins the Sandover medal. Jai Bolton's won it once or twice, I think, and he's just an absolute gun. Just great extractor of the ball from stoppages and centre bounces. And I would love, every time I see him play for Claremont, I think, geez, I'd love to have this guy on our side. So he's probably one of the main ones. But yeah, often you look at other teams and have a bit of jealousy at some of their players.
You just never know. But the one thing is to appreciate somebody's skill from another team. Like I love when fans have just that much as appreciation for another player's skill and their ability. So I love it.
Yeah.
So anybody that watches this channel knows I am a huge advocate for women's footy. I think women's
Yeah.
footy needs the investment. I think some of these girls sometimes I think go after the footy even harder than some of the men do. So I ask
Yeah.
this, do you support does West Perth have a women's side? And if so, do you support them?
Yeah, I do. I probably don't keep as keen an eye on them as the men's team, but I keep a little bit of an eye on them. They have the scores up on the website and on the app quite often, and I keep an eye on it. I'd love to get more into it and more into the women's side of things. The WAFL has a women's competition, so I think just about all of the 10 teams are represented. So that's a developing side of things in the Australian rules football game. And I really hope that it gets a lot more traction and gets a lot more interest because, as you said, it's terrific to see the women involved. And it's no less entertaining watching the women than it is the men, I find.
Well, and especially for me, I'm a huge, like I said, I watch AFLW, I cover it. It is a
Yeah.
different, it is a different game. It is a
Yeah.
vastly different game. So there's
Yeah.
different intricacies to it that I enjoy because I think sometimes the women have to play it just a little bit differently than the men do, and
Yeah.
I think it makes it that much more interesting because there is the fact that they have to be much more tactical sometimes because the kick isn't going to be as long. Again, it's
Yeah. That's
physiology.
right.
It is there are women that can outkick men. There's I will say that,
Yeah.
and some men might get mad about it, but you know what? It's honest. There are some women that can outkick men. So, but the ability for them, and they go hard at the footy and they don't care. Absolutely love it. So I thoroughly enjoy it. I really want to support it. So that's fantastic that there is the women's side there and that you're willing to keep an eye on it. So
Yeah.
This may be a stateside question, but I gotta ask because I cover
Yeah.
AFL, I cover AFLW. Who is your AFL side and why?
Oh, Sydney Swans. I was brought up, as I said, with just my dad and me. And my dad always waxed lyrical about Sydney, and coming from Sydney. And I was just a baby when he brought me over here to Perth. Um, but this kind of um, connection with Sydney grew in me as a boy and as I got older. And in 1982, when I was 10, um, South Melbourne Football Club became the Sydney Swans. So it kind of coincided with me being interested in football. And I went, oh, Sydney has got a team. I'll start following them in the VFL, back then the VFL. Um, Back then it was all about the waffle until the West Coast Eagles came in 1987. And then it became all about all about the West Coast Eagles and the AFL. But before then, the VFL was a very much secondary comp in
Mm-hmm.
Perth. It was the waffle was WAFL was massive, massive, massive. As I said before, getting 25,000 to a Perth Derby, and the Fremantle Derby was the same, and massive crowds to the waffle. And it wasn't until the West Coast Eagles came in '87 that that kind of altered a little bit. But yeah, so Sydney Swans became my team, and that grew a lot. I copped a fair bit of flack living in Perth, being a Sydney Swan supporter.
Well, especially I'm
I
thinking
never,
oh 05, oh 06 might have been interesting with their little rivalry that they
yes,
had
well,
for those few years.
going back even further than that, the first year was '87, as I said, when the Eagles came in, and the first time I actually got to see the Sydney Swans live. When they came here to Perth to play the West Coast Eagles in round three, was very early on in the season. And I remember sitting there in 1987, round three, and I reckon it was me and maybe two other Sydney Swan supporters in like 40,000 people. And I got things thrown at me and abused, and I was 13 years old. Like I still cannot believe the reactions that I copped that day. Anyway, um, but um, but just the excitement of seeing Sydney Swans live as a 13-year-old boy, never having seen them live before. And but I think that a lot of, a little bit as a kid, when the Eagles came in, I was tossing up, oh, maybe I should change to the West Coast Eagles. When that happened that day, I was like, I'm never changing to the West Coast
I
Eagles.
love it. Absolutely love it. And anybody that listens to my podcast, they know I'm a Sydney Swan. I am a huge Sydney Swan supporter myself. Absolutely adore the club. I think their history with South Melbourne is something that really made me fall in love with it. And it's just fascinating. So I love that. We'll kind of go off the previous question a little bit too.
Yeah,
AFLW, the Swans started their season. Did you keep an eye on the
yeah,
team this year? Kind of what were your thoughts? I know no wins. I understand that,
yeah,
but I saw progression and I saw a lot of things that I'm super, super excited to see, especially some young players like Montana Ham, Cynthia Hurley, and Sophia Hurley and Cynthia
yeah.
Hamilton. I think are going to
Hamilton,
be
yeah.
a ton of fun to watch.
Yes, yes, I agree. Yeah, I must admit, when I first heard, me and my daughter had all, as I said, she's 9, and like since she's about 4 or 5, she's been watching Sydney Swans games with me, and she was always like, "Why isn't there a girls' team, Daddy? Why isn't there a girls' team?" And
Mhm.
so as soon as they announced that they were doing a girls' team, we were both so excited, and we like jumped on and became members of the girls AFLW Swans as straight away, and we sit down and watch every game from start to finish, like really intensely. Those couple that they lost by like a couple of points, especially that one to
Mhm.
Hawthorn when they were like 28 up, kicked 5 goals in 15 minutes, and then lost. We still can't believe this day that happened, but it was so exhilarating watching the girls' team. And like you said, there's different tactics and different things involved. And learning about those tactics is thoroughly fascinating. Just learning about the differences, and yeah, so it's a great thing to share with my daughter, and I love doing that. She loves doing that, and yeah. all of these losses, as I always say, is going to make the wins and the premiership when it comes all the more sweeter.
100% agree with you. So we're gonna stay one more Swans question before we go to some
Yeah,
fun ones at the end, because I have to ask this question as a Swan
yeah.
supporter. Buddy Franklin's 1,000th goal. What were you doing when the goal went through, and how did you react?
Well, once again, it was a huge family thing. We were all at home here, and I wanted to document it for my YouTube channel. I wanted to document our reactions and everything because it was such a big thing for so many people. So we were all in the lounge room, and 996, 997, 998, 999, and we were jumping around, and it was very exciting. And yeah, I don't know if it'll ever happen again. I hope it does, but yeah, seeing and Buddy's been such an amazing player for the Swans and for Hawthorn and given so much. And this whole debate about Buddy with, has he been worth it, even though he hasn't won a premiership with the Swans? I mean, his value to the club is so much more than just a premiership. I had this dream. It was funny because I had this dream for years that at the end of his 10-year contract, at the end of 2022, we'd make a grand final and he'd kick the winning goal. Um, and we got to the grand final, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way. And he's going to go on next year anyway. So, but yeah, it was an amazing experience, wasn't it, for everyone? I think everyone watching felt a part of it, even though they weren't at the game. It was just such an amazing thing.
I've told this story on a few podcasts, and I know some of my regulars they're gonna put their fingers in their ears because I've heard this story before. But I'll tell you my story. Because I'm in the States. The game started at 4:45 a.m. my time on a
Oh
Friday night.
wow!
I work
Yeah,
early. I work at 6 a.m. and I was working from home. So I had my iPad underneath my computer
yeah,
monitor. My bosses aren't listening, thank God, or they'd get mad at me for watching something. But when 1,000 went through, I had the most surreal moment because it is
wow.
6:30 in the morning. I can't yell. I can't scream. I can't run around.
You got to hold it
So
in.
I am pumping my fist to the side with no sound because I can't say anything. My partner's sleeping in the condo that we're in. I'm in a condo complex. I've got three neighbors. I can't wake them up. I can't go nuts. I can't go running. So it was the most surreal moment of my life because I'm sitting here celebrating because I agree with you. I don't think this is going to happen again. As much as I would
Yeah,
love to see somebody kick 1,000, I just don't see the way the game is played and
yeah,
defended
absolutely.
nowadays. I just don't see it happening. So
Yeah,
to be able to take this in and enjoy this moment and to see the fans run onto the field and then all the stories, somebody spreading their nan's ashes, somebody having a
yeah,
picnic,
yeah,
somebody
yeah, yeah.
asking their fiance to, or getting engaged on the field, the fact that two of the players accidentally went outside the ground because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
got lost, all the stories. And I agree, when I had a fun chat with Jude Bolton. It's like the number of people that are going to say that they were there is just going to keep it's going to be
Oh
1
yeah, yeah,
million.
yeah,
It's going to be 1
yeah,
million in the
yeah,
next 10 years that are all going to say I was there, when it was only what 30,000 28, 27, 30,000 people that were actually at the ground there. So it's just this surreal moment that, though I'm 13,000 kilometers away in the central part of Iowa, way away from Sydney, I still had the chance to enjoy that moment, knowing that
yeah. That's
it
great.
may never, ever
Yeah,
happen again. So it's a cherished memory of mine again. And I had mates that were at the game that sent me videos. I had pictures sent on my Facebook Messenger and my Twitter Messenger, like, Donnie, I have to send you this picture. Like people were taking selfies on the ground. So it's a special moment for me because it was really cool to see my favorite player. Yes, even when he was at Hawthorn, he was my favorite player, Buddy Franklin,
okay.
kick his 1,000th goal in the Swans Guernsey, and to be able to
Yeah,
celebrate it. And thankfully, nobody got hurt, nobody got injured, everything
yes,
went
yeah. That
through.
was so important. Yeah,
It was terrifying there for a bit when
yeah,
like there's 20 minutes has already passed and he's
yeah,
halfway through the ground.
yeah,
Thankfully, a couple of
yeah,
really good Samaritans were able to get him back to the race. He was able to kind of celebrate with his teammates, and they eventually got the game going. Though I think most people, after about after that goal went through, most people cannot remember the end of the game because,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it took forever to get it
yeah,
restarted. I think it was like 45 minutes. It was
yeah,
insane how long it took. So it's a very treasured memory for me. So
yeah,
that's awesome to find that out. So we'll jump to a few fun questions for me. I love these type of ones. Is that you're with you being in Perth, you had the
yeah.
great experience of the grand final in 21 and 20 were outside of Victoria for the first ever twine.
Oh
21
yeah,
being in the Gabba and 20 and 21 being in Perth. So as a Perth person currently, the MCC has the 50-year contract. So again, I'm gonna kind of pie in the sky here. Do you think the grand final should be almost like the US's Super Bowl, where it's a traveling grand
mm.
final? Or do you like the fact that the grand final is at the MCG? There's a little bit of tradition there. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a traditionalist. I think it should stay at the MCG. I think that it's. I know that's not going to be very popular with Perth people, but I totally believe that's where it should be every year. Neutral ground, mostly. I mean, I just don't. The other thing about interstate grand finals is that what happens is. Um, you get a whole bunch of people who go, oh, the game's here in Perth or in Brisbane or whatever, and go, oh, the grand final's an event, let's go. But they're not necessarily really interested in football at all.
Mm-hmm.
At least the corporates that are there in Melbourne still probably follow a team and they
Mm-hmm.
follow, you know what I mean? And they love the game. Whereas the corporates you get at a ground, you're going to get half as many people, like if you come to Perth, because the ground
Mm-hmm.
doesn't hold as much, or at the Gabba. Um, but a lot of people are just going in the other states because it's an event, not because they actually want to be there. Like when the game was here in Perth, good luck trying to get a ticket. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was just sold out so quickly. And the talk everywhere you went was, are you going to the grand final? And then you would talk to people and they go, oh, I got tickets, I got tickets. And then you talk to them and they go, oh, which team do you go for? And they go, oh, I don't really follow AFL, but
Mm-hmm.
they're going to the game. So that kind of annoyed me a little
Mm-hmm.
bit because I was like, you've actually taken the ticket away from somebody that loves the game
Mm-hmm.
and has a team and all of this sort of thing. So I think you get a lot more of that when you go outside of Melbourne as well. And I think that Melbourne is the traditional place, 100,000 people. What the other thing, if I can throw another annoying thing in there, they had an opportunity in Perth after they decided to not play to build a new stadium. They had an opportunity in Perth to build a bigger stadium, and they've built one with a capacity of maybe 10 or 15,000 more than what they had before, which showed to me a bit of a lack of foresight. I thought, if you're going to build a stadium, as everyone raves about how good the stadium is, but it does have its negatives. If you're going to build a new stadium here in Perth and you want to compete with the big boys in Melbourne or whatever, then you need to build a 100,000 stadium, and that was the other thing. Like if you want the grand final often, then you need to build a stadium that's big enough. And the government didn't have the foresight to do that. So I kind of went, oh, you can't expect to have the grand final a lot in other states when you're not going to have the same capacity and the same level of interest from people who are diehard footy supporters, if you know what I mean.
No, it makes complete sense. It's everybody's different. I know that for many Victorians, it's almost a visceral reaction. And again, I don't say that in a negative way. I actually respect the passion and love the passion for it. And
Yeah,
some of the outer state ones, they're a little bit more amenable to it. But I mean, it's a great point there that it does kind of come off as it's almost a spectacle. Like they want to go like
yeah,
almost like the Super Bowl a little bit. It's almost the glitz and
yeah,
glam. It's not really about the game. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
about having the chance to be there. So it
yeah,
does take away from the footy fan that really wants to go to see a grand final that most people don't get to go see a grand final.
yeah. That's
Most people
right.
don't
Yeah,
have that luxury. So the fact that you get a glamour fan, shall we say, that's not really there for the game gets to go, it does kind of but it's a good way of looking at it, and it's just a different way. So we'll go to next season in the AFL and stay with it. They've announced the gather round again, stealing the
Yeah,
NRL's magic round and stapling on their own different name to it. Whether or not I like gather round, I'm still not 100% sure. But we're gonna have all 9 games in South Australia.
yeah.
Kind of, what are your thoughts on this? I don't mind it. I think the fixture is a little wonky. I think there's some games that I think I'm kind of like, "Eesh,"
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
where they are. So I mean,
yeah.
I'm kind of iffy on it. Would you think about going to Gather Round at all? And what are your thoughts on Gather Round?
I would love to go and see all 9 games in a round. To be honest, when I said to my wife, if this happens in Perth, I'm going to all 9 games, and apparently there's a good chance that it might be in Perth in 2024. So, but yeah, if it wasn't so expensive to get over with flights and accommodation and everything, I'd love to go. But your point is well made there, because I remember James Brayshaw, who's spent a lot of time living in South Australia, from Triple M, who said that you couldn't really have that in South Australia because some of those other grounds are actually really really small,
Mhm.
and you can't have all 9 games at Adelaide Oval, obviously. But they went ahead and they've fixtured some of those games at some of those really small grounds. So that'll be interesting to see how it goes. But I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's a great idea. I think it's anything that gives us more AFL, I'm all for. And I think it'll work a treat as well. I think people will really get into it.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated to see how SA fans do they show up to these games, because my one worry is the South Australia did all this to get this first one, and then if none of the South Australian locals go to the games except for the Port and the Adelaide game, I'd be worried it puts a little bit of a damper on something that they
Sure.
they screamed about wanting to have there. So I hope
Yeah.
the locals go to the
Get behind
games
it.
just to be sure. I'm hoping. I think they will, but because
I
it's
think they
footy
will
mad.
too.
Oh, they're footy
I think
mad, but
also too, the other point with that is that remember that when they had the women's grand final a few years ago, they got like 50,000
53
people. So I think you've got
53,000. Mm-hmm.
I think you've got a lot of people in Adelaide who just love the game,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily love their team, and so I think a lot of those games I think, will be pretty well patronised.
Yep, I agree with you, and I really hope they do, because I think it would be great not only for tourism in SA, but just to show the love
Yeah.
for footy in South Australia, which again, it's a footy mad state, just like WA and just like Victoria. Footy is king in those states. So some of my last questions for me is a little bit of research. As I told many people, I've
Sure.
never been to Australia. It is on my
Yeah.
bucket list. I am going to go. The thing though is I've got so many mates in all the different parts, like I'd almost like have to spend a month just to be able to get to see everybody. I've got friends in WA, I've got friends in Queensland, I've got friends in SA, I've got friends in Sydney, I've got
Oh,
friends in
great.
Victoria. I swear I think I'd have a couch to crash in every single state if I went. So I'm doing some research and I'm taking some notes down. So it's the a little bit of an American in me. When you go to the footy, what's your go-to food?
Oh, without doubt, pie and sauce. Like, I know that's hard to kind of understand in America, but yeah, we love our meat pies and sauce and like a Coke or something. So, yeah, and maybe a hot dog or whatever. But yeah, first go to is always a pie and sauce at the football.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you this. I don't know if you've seen it on my Twitter, but the last couple of years for the grand final, I make homemade Aussie meat pies for the grand final,
Oh wow,
specifically
cool.
just to be able to have that a little bit of Aussie experience. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
you don't get a lot of Aussie beers up here, so it's like I can't have
sure.
a beer and a pie. So it's not, and I'm not going to rock the Fosters because I've been told by many Australians that's not
Tastes terrible,
Australian.
apparently.
Don't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've don't argued the Fosters. I've been nice about that, but it's been so much fun, because I had a WA friend of mine go, mate, you need a passport for this. Like you're going all out, like you're going full Aussie, making the Aussie meat pies for it. So I agree. I've been told that they're the ones that you bite in and you burn your tongue because then in
Yes.
parts of it's
Yes.
cold, parts of it's like bloody
Yes.
hot. So so I'm looking forward to it. I would definitely probably have myself a 4 and 20 pie while I'm down there. So, and the other thing that I gotta ask is when you go to the footy, where is your ideal place to sit? I'm trying to find the best
Oh,
place to sit to watch the footy
oh,
when I go.
there's only one place to sit for me, and that is right level with the centre bounce, like in the middle. A lot of people say behind the goals and all this sort of thing, but I actually find that when you're behind the goals, it's, the other end is too far away.
Mhm.
I want to see both ends equally. And I even, living in Perth, you'll find this probably funny, but um, I flew over to Sydney for a game in 2013 and then randomly got a seat that was so perfect. Like it was that I actually rang the Swans 2 days later on the Monday and I said, can I have that seat? Like, I mean, I might only go to one game every 2 years and fly over,
Mhm.
but I want that seat. So I like bought that seat and became like whatever level of member, where it was like, $1,000 a year.
Mhm.
Um, just to keep that seat because it was such a great seat where you could see both sides equally in the stand there. And so, yeah, I kept that for like 6 or 7 years. And I only think I went to 5 or 6 games in that time. So, but yeah, there's only one place to sit for me, and that's where you can see both ends equally. Kind of, I mean, if it's ground level, that's fine too, but where you're raised up in the stand to be not too high because then it's nosebleed stuff, but where you're about halfway up, so then you've got a beautiful view of everything that happens.
Yeah, that second, I think that's the most common answer is the second level in either midfield or the wing
Yeah,
have been the two most popular ones because they say that
yeah,
you can see the entire ground, you can see the plays go, but you're not. They said the only bad part is they said when you get to the ground level, it's hard to see the opposite side of the field. You can hear the hits, you
yes,
can hear
yes,
kicking the footy, but you can't see the farther side of the
yes,
field without a little
yes.
bit of help.
That's
So
true.
that's been the common answer. And then the last question that I asked this, it just because I love this, you never know what you're going to get. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen live on television at the ground. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm sorry. This is probably be a bit of a long story, but um, I had never been to a grand final, never been to a grand final, and it was January 2012, and my wife said to me, she said, I want to get you a really great present this year. And it's your 40th birthday this year, 2012. She said, I want to take you to the grand final. And I'd never been to one. And I was just blown away. I was just like, this is going to be great. I've never been to a grand final. This is so exciting. My wife is Albanian, so she's kind of adopted AFL,
Mhm.
but it's not really something that she's majorly into. But anyway, she has adopted it because I love it, of course, and Emily loves it, my daughter. So cut a long story short, but as you know, as the year goes on, we just keep winning and winning and winning and winning. And, we booked this in January. And I was like, I don't care who's playing. I'll just great to see a
Mhm.
grand final. Um, and as the year went on and on and on, um, we I couldn't believe we kept winning. I mean, we were projected that year to maybe make the finals just. If we did make the finals, it would be only just. And um, just the way the cards fell in that season, like playing Adelaide in the first week of the finals in Adelaide, they were the one team out of all of the other team in the eight that I went, yeah, we can beat them on their home ground.
Mhm.
And then we hadn't been Collingwood for 10 years, and we are playing them at home in the preliminary final. And I went, we are due to beat Collingwood. We're going to beat them. We haven't beaten them for so long. This is the day. And then the game, I mean, that game to be up by 28, they kicked 5 goals in a heartbeat to get back in front in the third quarter. When Hale kicks that goal and then 10 points in front, early in the last, you're thinking the game's gone here. Then Buddy misses all those shots. And then to kick the last four and win that game. And my first grand final, and there was a bit of conjecture with the people around us about how much time was left in that
Mm-hmm.
game, because nobody actually knows, because it's not like TV where you get the countdown clock. You don't at the game, you have no idea. So when Adam Goods kicked that goal and we were 7 in front, it was 85-78. I've got it memorized.
Mm-hmm.
85-78. All the people around us were saying there's like a minute to go. And I just absolutely lost my shit. I was bawling my eyes out, like, because I was so happy that we were going to win the grand final. And then someone throws in, like, no, there's like 7 minutes to go.
Oh,
And
ultimate high back down to
I've
low.
completely lost it already. Like, we've already won the game, and like and that just, I was like, oh my goodness, surely we can't lose it from here. Like, it's a 12-month kind of excitement thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Malcheski to kick that goal,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just the most exhilarating thing of all time. And anyone who's a Swan supporter will tell you the same, who was at the ground or watching on TV for that matter. So to not win one for 72 years, 2005 was pretty amazing as well. Like, I had a group of people at my house who were all Eagle supporters. So to actually win that game was great as well. But I think 2012 was pretty amazing to actually be there, and when, I just was happy whoever made the grand final, and then for Swans to not only make it but win in the way they did, that was just a dream come true.
That is fantastic. And the crazy part is I will 100% honest. Some people will say it's a bandwagon. I think 2012 was one of the things that solidified me as a Swan supporter, legit. Like, I've told a few people this. I said, when I've been asked, why are you a Swan supporter? Why did you choose the Swans? I said there's actually 2 highlights and then 1 game. The 2 highlights were Nick Davis in 2005
Oh,
in
wow,
the
yes.
4 goals, like, because I was just getting, I was like, I just had started playing for the Des Moines Roosters here in Des Moines,
Oh, yeah.
and I wanted to watch highlights. And there were 2 highlights that almost always came on: the Leo Barry mark in the 2005 grand final to solidify the win and to end the 72-year drought, and Nick Davis's 4 goals in the game against the Cats in
Yeah.
in the semifinal. And they just, the atmosphere that in both of those games, and the eruption when Nick Davis kicks his 4th goal and the place goes absolutely bonkers. Like, there
Yeah.
was nobody sitting still. People are
Yeah.
crying. It's just absolutely
Oh, it
going
was just
nuts.
amazing.
But then the fact, like, I kept seeing these highlights and I'm like, Sydney Swans, and I've always been somebody, I've said this many times, I pick teams with unique nicknames. I hate being just, well, I'm in Des
The
Moines. I live
Lions or
close
the
to
Tigers.
Minneapolis. I'm going to pick the Vikings. I don't do
Yeah.
that. Like, I'm one of those. I
Yeah.
want a unique nickname. I want something a little on. And the Swans caught my eye. And it was like, and then watching 2012, the gritty, blue collar, tough, tackling,
Yeah.
gritty
Totally.
style that they played, I was
Mm.
like, this is me. This is my, like,
Yeah.
it
Sure.
really fit my personality and
Yeah.
kind of the,
Yeah.
as I say here in Iowa, the Midwest life. I mean, we're very blue collar, very hardworking. So it connected with me. And then for
Yeah.
them to win and to do it in a game that was so exhilarating, back and
Yeah.
forth and back and forth, I
It
was like,
was.
that did it. That legitimately, that 2012 grand final did it. And some people was, you're a bandwagon. No, I said,
No.
I stayed after that grand final. I became a fan. I started watching all these videos. I started studying South Melbourne. I started looking about when they moved up to Sydney in 82, the teams, how many years that they had such crap teams that they couldn't win a
Yeah.
game, and then
Yeah.
how the coaching finally came in and they finally started getting a few stars, and then Plugger comes up and things start
Yeah.
changing. And it was
Yeah.
just like
Amazing.
the renaissance of South/Sydney. and then 2005, and just the emotion of ending a 72-year drought. It was like,
Yeah.
that did it. Like, legitimately, that did it. So the fact you say 2012, I still have that game on my computer. I watch it at least once a year.
Yeah,
I
same.
will never get rid of it. I will never stop it. And the fact that
Yeah.
Dennis Committee and Bruce McAvaney are calling that game, both in that game, and the legends that they are. And
Yeah.
cometh the moment, cometh the champion, that
Oh,
Bruce
yeah. What a great
McAvaney
line.
says
Yeah.
when Goods kicks that goal. I
Yeah.
rewind that and hear
Yeah.
him say that
Yeah.
3 to 4 times. When I watch the game, I have to rewind it. Cometh the moment, cometh the champion. Rewind, cometh the moment. I do it at least 2 or 3 times because I have to hear that call.
Yeah.
And to see Goods' reaction when they win the grand final, and he drops to his knees, and he tore his PCL in the game, but he still
Yeah. What an
drops to
amazing
his
effort.
knees and celebrates
Yeah.
in the center square.
Yeah.
Done. I was a Swans fan. I became an international member 2016. As I say to many people, I have
That's
never
great.
regretted that decision ever. The Swans
Yeah.
supporters have welcomed me with open arms,
Yeah.
and
Great.
I've said it. That game is really the reason I became a Swans supporter, and I've not ever regretted that decision ever. So that's cool for you to say that, because it makes me smile, because it really was.
Yeah.
That was the first grand final that I sat there and I went, I really need to pick a team. And there I get the team
Yeah. It
right then and there. So
was an
all
amazing
righty.
day.
Now that we've went on memory lane there, Nathan, this has been an absolutely fantastic chat again. Thank you for letting me learn a little bit about a stateside in West Perth. I will definitely keep an eye on West Perth this year, and see what it is to be a West Perth fan. It is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, sir.
No worries.
This has been fantastic.
Anytime, mate. Good to talk to you. And if you ever want a part two, there's plenty more stories.
Awesome, awesome. I will. And we may actually look into that, definitely, for sure. The worst case scenario, you and I should have a video chat, and just you could
Yeah,
share some
totally.
stories with me, even if
Absolutely.
it's not recorded. So,
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for another episode of my off-season supporter series. Keep an eye out. I have more waffle supporters, I have sample supporters, and I'm working on a few VFL supporters to try to get more statesides in. I've got my AFL supporters, as you can see, many still to come. Keep an eye out. I'm gonna get us to March, to the AFL regular season. So we've got some footy talk now until the season gets
Right.
started. We will be back very, very soon with some more episodes in my Donnie's Supporters off-season supporter series.